have a lot to tell us about the mind, about intelligence. So let me just say that I did participate in the Oxford meeting in Wilkes.
Yes, you did.
Conference. And the paper there was on Kathy Wilkes, but I don't mention her here at all. So, okay. So here's an outline. I'm going to talk a little bit about Myrmecology 101, and this is based on Herbert Simon's idea of the ant on the beach, and I'll explain that. And then go to another example concerning how ants are able to build bridges. One might not know that they are. And then I'm going to try to, I think, provide an alternative explanation inspired by the ants, an alternative explanation to some of the ideas that we'll be talking about concerning intelligence, and then say something more about embodied intelligence. It's the EI. AI, ZI, and EI. ZI will become clear as we go on. So Herbert Simon was one of the high priests of cognitivism, I think, and a major proponent of artificial intelligence. He was very convinced that the mind is computational, and he was also clearly opposed to embodied situated cognition, or at least he seemed to indicate this, saying, for example, there's no need for cognitive psychology to adopt a whole new language and research agenda. Here he's responding to a critique that was proposed that he should take into consideration more of the embodied nature of cognition. Stephen Stitch, who also is very much a cognitivist, emphasizes the computational conception that he finds in Simon. He says, as is generally the case in artificial intelligence, the principles must be explicit enough to be programmed on a computer. And in some way, Simon's project is quite similar to expert systems studies in AI. The initial goal is to produce a computational simulation of the reasoning of people who are experts at doing science. And I think that interpretation of Simon's work continues to hold sway and be in general agreement about how Simon is this high priest of cognitivism and computational notion of the mind. So you find that repeated recently, for example, by Wilkes. And yet it's also well known that Simon proposed the concept of bounded rationality, which seemed to make room for the environment as a contributor to cognition. So much so that Stitch, who is a complete internalist, complained about this aspect of his thinking. Simon proposed the metaphor of the scissors for bounded rationality. The two blades of the scissors work together to allow for its proper function, and they represent two aspects of rationality. On one side, it's the cognitive limitations. On the other side, it's the structure of the environments. Towards the extreme, Simon even points in the direction of what would become known as the zero intelligence trader, which I'll say a little bit more, where he says a great deal can be learned about rational decision making by taking account of the fact that the environments to which the mind must adapt possess properties that permit further simplification of its choice mechanisms, the mind's choice mechanisms. So he's indicating that the environment can play an important role here. And still pointing in that direction, Simon offers a second and perhaps even a richer metaphor, and this is the metaphor of the ant on the beach. In Simon's parable, you cannot understand the ant's behavior just by looking at the ant, looking in the head of the ant or anything like that. So he says, viewed as a geometric figure, The ant's path is irregular, complex, hard to describe. But its complexity is really a complexity in the surface of the beach, not a complexity in the ant. A man, considered as a system capable of having a behavior, is very simple. The apparent complexity of his behavior over time is largely a reflection of the complexity of the environment in which he finds himself. So he wants to say, in some way, human cognition is in some respects like the ant on the beach, that it is made more complex, not so much internally, but by the environment that one finds oneself in. So one might argue that Simon's emphasis on the environment is somewhere in the neighborhood of the idea of the extended mind, as Vasto and Myrmecology recently in their book, Embodiment in Political Economy, have said. Andy, you know who Andy Clark is, although I think today we heard of a more embodied Andy Clark than I'm going to describe here. So, but that's good. People change and develop. That's good. So Andy Clark, for example, suggests that Simon saw very clearly that portions of the external world often functioned as a non-biological kind of memory. He thus saw the deep parity, not identity, that can obtain between external and internal resources. And he admits, however, that Simon never fully embraced the notion of extended cognition. And in some respects, again, the kind of common interpretation is that he retreats to a kind of internalism. Oops. Okay. So Philip Ugry, for example, points out, Simon abandons his insight, asserting that he is only interested in cognition and not in embodied agents, and moves on to discuss his studies of human performance on cryptarithmetic puzzles. The computational models of Newell and Simon's school have affirmed their wholly cognitive view of such puzzle solving by locating the state of the process within the individual's short-term memory. So on the one hand, Simon's view of the environment remained somewhat abstract. Environments were reduced to the structure of the task environment and relatively separated from other aspects of cognition. Arnall and colleagues suggest that for Simon, the environment plays only a methodological or normative role. An environment, in other words, is for Simon, as it may be also for Gigerenzer, ecological economics. The environment is what decides whether a heuristic is fit or unfit for use. That alleviates Stitch's worry somewhat. Acknowledging that Simon limits the role of the environment, he indicates, and for good reason, things are complicated enough already without trying to see how well our simulations do in competing with other simulations in a complex social environment. On the other hand, Simon's ant parable allows for simplification and minimization of choice mechanisms in tandem with the complexity of environmental structure. And this led to the idea of strong market design and the notion of the zero intelligence trader in Goad and Sunder. This is a concept that reappears in Andy's extended mind analysis, specifically in his discussion of economic institutions. So the ZI trader, the zero intelligence trader, is a trader who buys or sells randomly without a strategy, without memory, or without a response to other traders, operates therefore as an extreme idealized tool for modeling or simulating markets. Goad and Sunder designed an artificial simulated market of ZI traders operating on a specific set of rules that specify the market design. Specifically, a continuous double auction market like a stock market, where a trade occurs automatically when a bid and an ask meet. And they show that this market expresses rational behavior. So in effect, they were letting the environment do all of the work. Right? The agent didn't have to do any thinking at all, say, just had to follow the rules of the market. Andy then cites Godin's Under as he builds on Douglas North's work. North was a very well-known Nobel Prize winner for his work in institutional economics. In contrast to North's original internalist view, where he takes markets to be a set of rules that could be expressed as a kind of shared mental model, Andy suggests that the environment can do some of the work. Because markets provide information, serving therefore an epistemic function, good market design allows for the creation of a kind of cognitive scaffolding. A market environment is something like the beach, as for the ant, the beach designed to support or constrain our cognitive efforts. Accordingly, certain market rules can lead to efficiency, even in the extreme case of a zero intelligence trader who has offloaded all cognitive tasks to market mechanisms. So, in the case of the zero intelligence trader, as Jeffrey Hodgson explains, structural constraints, not the individuals, do much or all of the explanatory work. The internal intelligence of individuals is traded for the external intelligence of the designed system. As Andy puts it, we humans excel in one crucial respect. We are masters at structuring our physical and social worlds so as to press complex, coherent behaviors from these unruly resources. We use intelligence to structure our environment so that we can succeed with less intelligence. Our brains make the world smart so that we can be done in peace. And that's Andy in 1998, but I think you're still saying that. Yeah. Zero intelligence can characterize circumstances where, as Andy puts it, the explanatory burden for human behavior is borne by overall system dynamics in which the microdynamics of individual psychology is relatively unimportant. And he goes on, he says, in cases where the overall structuring environment acts so as to select in favor of actions which are restricted, so as to conform to a specific model of preferences, neoclassical economic theory works, and works because individual psychology no longer matters. The preferences are imposed by the wider situation and need not be echoed in individual psychology. So this concept of zero intelligent agents suggests that in specific environments, dumb agents, for example, symbol agents that make elementary, even arbitrary choices, can generate outcomes that are substantially rational for the system. So Myrmecology, the ants on the beach, and the ZI trader tell us that the environment is perhaps more important than Simon himself thought. You'll notice something missing here, however, in the kind of analysis provided by Godin, Under, and Andy back in the day, the social nature of markets. That seems not to be mentioned too much at all. Precisely the thing that Stitch wanted Simon to avoid. Remember, Stitch said things are complicated enough without introducing social aspects into this. So it's the individual agent coupled to a well-designed environment, despite the fact that market agents are never isolated from social context, and despite the fact that one cannot get design into the picture without social interactions. But despite all of that, there's no mention, no analysis of the social interaction in any of we've just gone through. Likewise, and consistent with Andy's functionalism, I think, the agent could be a human or a computer or a single ant on the beach. the nature of the agent's body is unimportant, although now, maybe today, we heard that it is a little bit more important. Neither bodily nature nor social relations seem to be important, at least in the discussion that was ongoing at that time. So I'm going to move on now to, again, something else that we can learn from ants. It's unusual to find one individual ant who is meandering around on the beach. We usually encounter a line of ants engaged in something like a collective march across the beach. Assuming the ant is a minimal or zero intelligent agent, and so it has no plan or strategy, so to speak, how do we get the emergent collective behavior that one finds on the beach? And we can say here that it's not just the environment, but it requires stigmergy. One agent's action triggers the succeeding actions of another agent, and the collective path results from pheromone traces left by the preceding ants, leading to a self-organizing collective behavior. So here, pheromone, this is body chemistry. The body has to be brought into this a little bit. So that's just on the beach, but there's also some more complex, I would say, social behavior, specifically the building of ant bridges. That more complex behavior requires not engineering degrees for the ants. We can still assume something close to zero intelligence agents. But it does require the right morphological characteristics of ant bodies. Bridges created by linking legs together, crossed over a gap. Ants, in fact, do this. They create these bridges and can climb over themselves so that they can get across that gap. My co-author, Antonio Mastrogiorgio, and I have this paper where we say, when it comes to model how the ants build a bridge using their own body, things are more complicated. Indeed, the model should include the shapes of the ants, as the legs must present very specific morphological features, shapes, angles, and so forth, in order to tangle, in order to create the bridge. But this would not be enough. Biomechanical properties, degrees of freedom, should be added to the model. Ants must be flexible in the right way to tangle, but strong enough to avoid breaking, and so forth. Hence, the number of bodily features to be included in the model is significant. So, Myrmecology suggests that we need to revise Simon's statement about ants on the beach, where he said the complexity is really a complexity in the surface of the beach, not a complexity in the ant. But it is, in some way, also a complexity in the ant's body that allows the ant to bridge build. Again, Simon says, a man considered as a system capable of having a behavior is very simple. The apparent complexity of the behavior over time is largely a reflection of the complexity of the environment in which he finds himself. But then we can sort of suggest that we also have to think about the complexity of the human body. So if we add the complexity of the human body, human embodiment, but also the complexity of human social interaction, which is not just stigmergic, pheromone-driven behavior, but includes institutions and design environments, but also material and intersubjective engagement, which is never just zero intelligence. To be clear and fair to Gold and Sunder, their idea of zero intelligence applies not to the isolated individual. These zero intelligence traders are not intended to be descriptive models of individual behavior. The system they describe is an aggregate of individuals. It's not the individual, but the market system as a whole that attains a rationality under these conditions, right? Still, their analysis remains formal and functionalist without any account that takes embodiment or the material characteristics of social interaction into account. So what I would propose then is what I'll call the inactive alternative. The inactive approach, and here I've been talking about what I refer to sometimes as the socially extended mind, kind of building on the paper that Andy had in 1997, where he was talking about the extended mind in these contexts of economics. A socially extended mind is a more inactive conceptual thing, which proposes to understand a market as a socially extended cognitive institution and to develop a picture of economic interactions among embodied agents, framed in terms of relational autonomy. I have that in brackets because I'm not really going to talk about that. Among embodied agents in an economic order enacted by those very same economic agents. So, cognitive institution, what exactly is that? And here in brief, I can define it with these 4 points. A cognitive institution would be a set of practices that have a cognitive function such that it generates a type of cognition that would otherwise not exist without the institution. It's instantiated or instituted in an organization constituted by social interaction and characterized by degrees of dynamical coupling and task dependency, which I'll talk about in a second. So this notion of cognitive institution is a conception that tries to capture the importance of social interaction in the constitution of any kind of social institution, really, economic institutions included. And the fact that once emerging from social interaction, these institutions then loop back dynamically and condition or constrain our ongoing social interactions and our cognitive abilities. So, in contrast to the extended mind focus on functional equivalency or functional integration, the idea that the individual is coupled to the environment can be captured by this kind of functional integration. The socially extended cognitive institutions idea involves this notion of task dependency. This is a concept that Mark Slors has proposed to define the difference between the extended mind and the socially extended mind. He says task dependency is the extent to which the intelligibility of a task depends on a larger whole of coordinated tasks. Task dependency is a notion that is connected with coordination and planning. It is a normative notion in the sense that high task dependency means that tasks play specific roles in the overall organization of a cognitive system or a cultural cognitive ecosystem, roles that can be played properly or improperly, so there are normative factors involved in this. So we've argued, myself and my co-authors, Antonio Mastrogiorgio and Enrico Petrarca, have argued that we can think of markets as examples of cognitive institutions. They involve a set of practices that have a cognitive function, specifically enabling and constraining economic reasoning. Accordingly, they generated cognition that would otherwise not exist without that institution. They emerge from and are built upon social interactions. You can't really trade or tango by yourself. They involve high task dependency, which is to say that people play different roles undertaken within and enabled by the institution, and are holistically interdependent and characterized by degrees of symbiotic dynamical coupling, ranging from mutually beneficial behavior to parasitic behavior. On this view, the market is a marketplace, that is, a real set of human interrelationships embedded in an affordance space, different tasks and roles. As an economic system, it's populated by roles and tasks that would not be possible or understandable outside of such an interconnected and interdependent system, such as market. Roles played by a variety of entities and agents. These are, in a market, these may include things like government regulators or planners, corporations, manufacturing units, service providers, marketers, wholesalers, retail agents, purchasers, consumers, and any number of economic roles in between those categories. So the idea here of task dependency is all of these different roles are played by various operators within the system. And if you pull one of those out, then the system might in fact collapse. You need all of these people working together, so to speak, to have what we call a market. In these task-related interactions, our cognitive work is shaped by the institutional features, and likewise, our cognitive work shapes the performance of the institution to then affect future cognitive processes. The market is thus not a machine or a set of mechanisms, it's us, it's the intersubjective social interactions that we engage in. The roles have to be played in order for the market to exist, which means they are played by you and me and others, and typically in some form of social interaction. Task dependency is interpersonal task interdependence. As Flores puts it, the tasks, jobs, and roles of others in the system co-define and enable one's own task. Even if material engagement or a set of deontic or normative arrangements or a set of rules are doing some of the work, which is quite possible, would it be possible to substitute a set of zero or minimal intelligence agents in the overall intelligence system of a real market? A market that requires something like social independence. I think, in any case, we should resist that idea to the extent that markets involve embodied and socially interacting agents. In Godin Sunder's design of an artificial simulated market of ZI traders, zero intelligence traders, all other factors concerned with embodiment and social interaction are eliminated. It's a highly designed, small world, formal rationality, something like a game rather than a real market. And as Simon viewed it, design and the artificial are possibilities that stand or fall together. And on this view, institutions and markets are a form of artificial intelligence to the extent that they approximate the zero intelligence model, where it's all about the market design that is driving the behavior. In this kind of market, as Andy has described it in that 1997 essay, what is doing the work is not so much the individual's cogitations as the larger social and institutional structures in which she is embedded. It is this fact, rather than facts about the beliefs, desires, and other psychological features of the individuals involved, that ensures the frequent success of substantive rationality models in predicting the behavior of firms. Strong constraints imposed by the larger scale market structure result in firm-level strategies and policies that maximize profits. In the embrace of such powerful scaffolding, the particular theories and worldviews of individuals may at times make very little impact on the overall firm-level behavior. Where the external scaffolding of policies, infrastructure, and custom is strong, and importantly, is the result of competitive selection, the individual members are, in effect, interchangeable cogs in a large machine. But I think bodies and social interactions add complicating factors in these types of markets. In the case of bounded rationality, where information is imperfect and one operates under time constraints, the fact that tasks, jobs, and roles of others in the system co-define and enable one's own task, as Soros says, means that they depend on imperfect agentive participation and interaction. And as Simon acknowledged, it is uncertainty that constrains the artificial. And uncertainty grows the more complexity is introduced. So sometimes the example of the supermarket is given for complexity, specifically the number of products in a supermarket. In a typical supermarket, there are roughly 100,000 distinct product types, not units, but just types of products, categories of products. And this means that even modeling a supermarket would require a model with 100,000 markets and their respective prices. But complexity goes deeper into task dependency. So J.D. Thomson made a pragmatic distinction, well known among organizational scholars, distinguish between pooled, sequential, and reciprocal interdependence of tasks. I think these are quite intuitive. That is to say, not all tasks are structured in the same way. Some of them, have different temporal structures, and some of them require other tasks to be done first, and so forth and so on. So this means that task dependency is not limited to an interconnection of roles. It also concerns the dynamical arrangement of tasks themselves, variations that sometimes depend on shared intentions and the meshing of sub-goals in cases of joint action, or alternatively on cooperative behavior patterns that are determined to varying degrees by rules, instructions, or routines, but also by customary expectations and habits, as well as by unexpected innovations. So this is the final part on the complexity, the notion of complexity in artificial intelligence. Simon thought that artificial intelligence would be capable of delivering good, although not perfect, solutions, even in a highly complex environment. He said, AI most often in the form of heuristic search, selective search using rules of thumb, find decisions that are good enough, and that satisfies. The AI models also only approximate the real world, but usually with much more accuracy and detail. They can do this because heuristic search can be carried out in a more complex and less well-structured problem space. Simon does acknowledge the difference between formal and uncertain informal settings, yet he thinks that even informal settings are not so complex to rule out AI capability. Still, his conception of complexity remains quantitative and symbolic. Some quantity of words, propositions, rules, all of which can be handled by artificial intelligence. The supermarket type of complexity, with uncertainty pushed to the margins. Here there has been and continues to be disagreement and continuing critique based on phenomenological approaches, the old approach of Dreyfus, and more recently, economic models, Gigerenzer's notion of heuristic intuition, for example. Here's Gigerenzer. Deep artificial neural networks are statistical machines that analyze correlations between a pattern of pixels or other inputs, and they work best in stable, well-defined worlds. Yet the more ill-defined a problem is, the more uncertainty that exists, the less successful statistical machines are. Human behavior is a key source of uncertainty. The general point here is that algorithms and big data can outperform humans in tasks that are well-defined and stable, such as playing chess or Jeopardy, and working on assembly lines, but not in ill-defined and unstable tasks, such as talent scouting or predicting human behavior. This is from an article in 2023. He refers to this as the stable world principle, which is, I think, a principle first iterated in Hubert Dreyfus' critique of AI. He said pretty much very similar things about formal versus informal settings. In regard to large language models, Gigerenzer cites questions posed to a chatbot by Douglas Hofstadter to show how hollow the model is. Phrasing the questions in the right way can lead to locating Egypt on the Golden Gate Bridge, serving breakfast to fried eggs, and the idea that a violin could be destroyed by a jelly bean. I'm not quite sure what those examples were, but LLMs lack any intuitive grasp of common sense. They can, of course, correct themselves given more information, but this does not add up to common sense. As Gigerenzer puts it, statistical procedures do not have intuition, common sense, or consciousness. But this is not AI's only limitation. Add the ongoing debates about the requirements of affectivity and intersubjectivity, and we can add interpersonality, yeah, and all of that. Add that to debates about intelligence, and one might think that artificial intelligence functions in a way closer to the zero intelligent agent, not only with much of the work done by the human designed machinery, but also with functions built on human information and resources like words, images, algorithms. So unlike ants, artificial intelligence functions and can only function in a human environment. With respect to ant bridges, the interaction between ants is determined just as much by their six-leggedness and their size and so on as by the information stored in their brain. Artificial intelligence, however, does not even have embodied intelligence. Embodied intelligence, more generally, requires a specific kind of body, namely an animal body rather than an artificial body. This is an old argument, I would propose. I think of Anaxagoras as the first inactive theorist because of what he said about hands. We had Andy, who was with me at a meeting here in Dubrovnik, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I don't know. It was a meeting about hands. And I think Anaxagoras basically, he said, quoted by Aristotle, he said, humans are the most intelligent animals because they have hands. Aristotle disagreed. He just reversed and said, we have hands because we're the most intelligent animals. But I think Anaxagoras was right, and so a very inactive statement, echoed by Rodney Brooks in a very recent article, just this past fall, where he basically talks about the limitations of robotics, and specifically mentions the lack of dexterity in robotic hands, and that you cannot get dexterity because what you need would be something like a database of touch, which doesn't exist, in any way. If you train LLMs on language and other AI programs on images, you don't have the same kind of thing for touch. Touch that Aristotle said is the most basic of senses. In any case, both Brooks and Anaxagoras are pointing to, again, not just the importance of hands, but hands are shorthand for human body as a whole, the importance of embodiment. Beyond workable hands, affectivity and intersubjective interactions play a significant role in the development of human intelligence. And that's what I would like to conclude with. I think Simon's ants, North's institutions, Godin Sunders, Z.I. Trader, and the early Clark's extended mind are all consistent with a functionalist, the body doesn't really matter too much, and cognitivist neoclassical analysis of market behavior and economic reasoning, which, as Hodgson puts it, suggests that ordered and sometimes predictable behavior can sometimes result largely from institutional constraints. The enactivist view, building on the idea of the socially extended cognitive institution, construes real-world behavior to involve a motley set of variables, social interactions, material ecological factors, social and cultural practices, embodied affective processes, individual skills, habits, interests, all dynamically integrated in a task-dependent intelligence system that is relational and always something greater than zero intelligence. So